The intention of pulling the curtains was not to put you in the dark. It was just to make the room darker so we could see something this morning. Well, good morning, brothers and sisters and Bible students. I find it just a little bit chilling in the sense of I gave a talk like this 56 years ago. It was right in the middle of the June War. I was in Australia, and the June War only lasted 6 days, and I had to talk almost every night, and I found it was particularly difficult to do it in the light of talking about Israel at a time when you were seeing such dramatic things happening in the world, and in particular in the land of Israel. That was certainly the way it was in 1967. And here we are again in 2023 talking about Israel at a time when there's so much going on in the land. And that will come into our talk, Lord willing, today as we proceed through it. Now, we are talking about the Isaiah scroll, but at the same time admitting that there were remnants of every book of the Bible found in the scrolls. As we mentioned last week, there's even now evidence for Esther having been found. So why would we concentrate on the Isaiah scroll, except that the Isaiah scroll is the one that Israel has placarded in the shrine of the book, which is in reference to all the things they found. Isaiah gets the front piece. And it's interesting to ask questions like that because I'm not sure I know what the answer is. Like sometimes you'd say, well, that's because they found the scroll intact. Well, they found other scrolls that weren't totally intact, but they found, quite a lot of that scroll. So that may be or may not be. It also was that Isaiah was one of the scrolls. In fact, I think it was the only biblical scroll that was found in the very initial announcement that scrolls were being found in Israel. It could be that it was found on the time of the establishment of the state of Israel, but I doubt that because I don't think there was very much that was ever recorded about the scroll itself, as we've been trying to make that known. So when you go into the shrine of the book, into the main hall, because you can see the spiral nature is the same nature. If you look on the outside, it's like a big cap on the top of a bottle. And that's the Isaiah scroll that's wrapped around the outside. It's not the actual scroll that was found, but it's a replica of it. Now, what we want to do is just review the classes that we have. Of course, we first of all talked about the excitement and the disappointment generally. We last week talked about Yahweh and Isaiah and the credentials that they have as it's found in the book of Isaiah so that we can see what both Yahweh and his prophet Isaiah were doing. Today we want to talk about the fact that Israel is blind. And we mean spiritually blind. In class 4, Christendom is confused. That would be looking at what Christendom at large made of the discovery of the scrolls. We want to look in class 5 at secular society missed it. The people that weren't religious didn't see anything significant in it. It just went over their heads completely. And then class 6, just to see the number of things in the book of Isaiah that speak about Yahweh will be vindicated. So we'd like to start off on this particular verse in Isaiah chapter 1. Now, this is maybe a reason why people didn't highlight this. Because the opening of Isaiah is not really recommending Israel. In the verse 3 of the very first chapter, the ox knows its owner, the donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know. My people do not consider. Alas, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a brood of evildoers, children who are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked to anger the Holy One of Israel. They have turned away backward. Well, if you were highlighting the scroll and you made that first few verses public attention, like you tried to draw their attention into it, you can understand how Israel say, well, I'm not too sure that's the way to best, illustrate our role as the people of Israel. But that's the way the scroll does start off, and you can't change it. I think it would be somewhat of an embarrassment to people to recognize how Israel or how Isaiah starts off its scroll. I mean, think of what God is doing here. The ox knows its owner, just like animals generally that we keep know their owner. So if it's a pet, a dog or a cat, maybe even a bird, they would know who their owner is. They would go to that person in preference to all others. The donkey knows its master's crib. It will go into the area where it's assigned because that's where it's going to be fed. Like God's trying to illustrate these animals of much lower intelligence know exactly what to do. How is it that my people with the much greater intelligence don't understand? Now, if you take the time to think that through, that's saying quite a bit. Why is it that the people of Israel don't know their God? And that's a question that we will try to answer somewhat today as we go through our class. If we look at the analysis of the Dead Sea Scrolls as they were announced by the voice of the scholars, I think that there is a very good illustration of this on the cover of the Message of the Scrolls, which is the one I've been talking about quite a bit. But this was written long after Yagal-Yadin, who was the writer of it, actually died. So this man's editor, as you see at the bottom there, in 1992. And he's the editor of it. So he's giving what Israel really thought about the scrolls and what they made of it. So no, we'll just read this, and I want you to see why it is they've missed it. So what does it say? On the book, advertising the finding of the scrolls, research into the origins of Christianity takes a decided shift. The claim that Christianity is essentially a Greek religion influenced by the mystery cults is now discarded. Now, earliest Christianity is seen to be deeply Jewish. In fact, it is part of the history of Judaism. It is frequently difficult, even impossible, to discern if a tradition, a passage, or even a whole document is Jewish or Christian. Since all the Dead Sea Scrolls are Jewish, it now becomes possible to perceive more accurately the Jewishness of Jesus, Paul, and the authors of Matthew, John, and Hebrews. Now, it would take the professors and the scholars to come up with that as a summary of what the scrolls revealed. A person who comes to go to the shrine of the book or comes to actually see what the scrolls tell us would be opening the scrolls and reading it. But, the Jews say, well, we've had those books for centuries. Why would we open them again? But that's the connect we're trying to make in this series. The fact that they were found at all. The fact that they were found at the time that they were found. That is when the Jews were coming back to the land. And what God was now going to do were the things that should have tied people to the scroll. They should have been able to go back, instead of just having that book illustrated around the way it was placed. Just think of the number of things they could have done if they had said in each place of a prophecy in Isaiah, number 1, go to exhibit number 1. Number 2, and look at all these prophecies that are made in the scroll that speak about Israel, either before to prove it's God's word, presently, look at what's happening, or in the future, look at the glorious future. A wonderful way to describe what they found in the scroll. But no, this is what you get. That's the scholars. We need students, I think. So in Qumran in 1947, they discovered the Isaiah scroll, not exactly in those caves. because those caves are probably the ones that have made the whole Dead Sea Scrolls more popular by the fact that it's a more appealing scene. Where the actual first scrolls were found is hard to make out that there's a cave there at all by any picture I've seen. So this is the one that's attracted attention. But there were 15,000 pieces of the scrolls found in those caves, because they had been destroyed by the Roman army. And what people assume is it was something like a library, and they went in there with their weapons of war and just slashed it all up. And so the remnants were all over the cave, and they had to put them back together. I don't suppose that the people who did it ever thought that would ever happen or could happen. But it did happen. And that was 1947. Isn't it interesting, if you look at this, when they were found in 1947, as we talked about in the very first talk, about the excitement of it, it was happening at a time when the world's nations, as they were gathered together in the United Nations Assembly in New York, were voting to actually make it possible for an Israeli state to be established. And as soon as it was declared, there was war. So the very discovery of these things was made at a wartime. Now, if you go on to look at what happened in 1956, because Yahweh thought there had to be scrolls at Masada. So he went down to Masada with his team to see what they could find. And I don't know that anybody had really been through Masada like they had, or like they did before that. So this was something of a new venture, and they went down there with a lot of interest at finding it, of what they would find. But now you just think, what was happening in 1956? There was another war going on in Israel in 1956. That was the Suez War, where the Egyptians closed the Gulf going into Israel and essentially closed all the ports in the southern part of Israel. And that led to war when France and Britain were involved in that war. So there's a second discovery. It's almost like God did it again at a time of war. And they went down to Masada to see what they could find. Well, they found a Geniza. Now, they were looking for this because they thought that if they found any scrolls at all, they would find them in a place where the people of the time would likely have put them. And since the Jews would never burn a scroll, they would never throw it out in the garbage, they buried it because they honored the Word of God, and they thought it should all have a proper burial. That's interesting, isn't it? In the way we deal with our old Bibles. Probably still have most of them. For those who have been through a number of our years, I certainly have most of mine. I might not have all of them, but they're there somewhere, I think. But in 1956, they finally decided that a piece of the wall at Masada was facing Jerusalem, and that was likely where the synagogue would be, because that's one of the qualifications for it to be a synagogue. It's got to face Jerusalem. So they went into this place, and they looked around and didn't find anything. So they thought, well, let's dig up the floor, because maybe the floor was laid afterwards and there was something buried underneath it. And that's where they discovered a couple places that would illustrate that, something actually has been disturbed there. There's been somebody in ancient history digging underneath that floor. And that's where they made this find, which I think was probably more sensational than the other find. Because as he writes it up in his book, he puts this picture, that's a picture of the page in the book. Really a book worth reading, just to see what they found and how they went about it. And I think that Yahweh probably was the best writer of any of the writers at the time to illustrate something like what God was trying to tell them. So the story goes like this. They found this place where it looked like earth had been disturbed. They started digging through it. They dug and dug and dug, and they got down to a point where, obviously you're not going to find any jars. And I don't think anybody ever thought that a scroll by itself, buried like that for 2,000 years, could ever survive it. But that's what they found. And you can see in the picture just some of the letters of what was left of the scroll. And interestingly enough, there was enough letters found that they could determine that came from the prophet Ezekiel chapter 37. Now, if you made some sense of what the prophet said in chapter 37, you then really see the miracle of it. But if you just look at finding a scroll there, and it's so sensational we found anything, which is largely what they said, then again, they missed it. Now, they had coinage there to illustrate that this was happening in about AD 73. It was after the fall of Jerusalem, because that's where the zealots went down to Masada to try to hide from the Romans. The Romans came down, and that's where they got them. But they found coinage there that had stamped right on it the date, so they knew the approximate date of the people that were there. Now, this is what the professor himself wrote in the book about these scrolls. He said, "It need hardly to be added at this stage that these two scrolls, because they found a little bit of Deuteronomy in another part, are virtually identical with the traditional biblical texts. These are only a few slight changes. There are only a few slight changes in the Ezekiel scroll. These two scrolls are important in themselves. They also lend support, as we have indicated, to the probability that this building was indeed a synagogue. But there is another aspect of high importance to the discovery of these two scrolls. They are the only ones found not on the floor, but in a geniza, beneath the floor, laid by the zealots. This means that the date of the scrolls cannot possibly be later than AD 73, and not even the most skeptical of scholars can challenge this." Well, to the scholars, that's really what they were trying to prove. But to Bible students, until you try to associate what they found with what was happening, they missed it. And that's why I say Israel really proved at that time to be spiritually blind. They didn't open the book. They didn't connect it to the text of what God was saying. So if we just look at this, what it means to the reader, I think it's important to note this. It says, "Then he said unto me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried, and our hope is lost. We are cut off for our parts. Therefore prophesy and say unto them, Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, Behold, O my people, I will open your graves, and cause you to come up out of your graves, and bring you into the land of Israel. And you shall know that I am Yahweh, when I have opened your graves, O my people, and brought you up out of your graves, and shall put my spirit in you, and ye shall live, and I shall place you in your own land. Then shall you know that I, Yahweh, have spoken it and performed it, saith Yahweh." Now you can see by the study that Christadelphians have made of Ezekiel 37 that there's still parts of that to be fulfilled. Because until the Jewish people themselves recognize what's happened in their history and how God has brought them back, and that they then come to know their God, then surely the whole text there cannot be fulfilled. So it's wonderful how that text dealt with history. They were cut off. There was no nation in the world called Israel. They were brought back, and they were to have a glorious future. Like, it's all there, past, present, and future. So that all the readers of the text could be impressed by that miracle, not just the people who happened to discover it. That's where you and I are expected to stand up and be counted. Because I think that's what God's looking for. The glory, according to the scriptures, is when people acknowledge God's role in their life and give thanks and praise to Him. So it's appropriate for us to have those feelings at this time. But closer look always reveals more. You see, this is Yahweh's word and a fulfillment, in a sense, in 1948. But what did it fulfill? Well, if you go to Isaiah 43, and you have a look, and we will look at a few verses in this chapter in Isaiah, things that could have been illustrated in the shrine of the book, could have been talked about by the authorities and to the scholars, but the prophet said, "But now thus saith Yahweh, who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you, I have called you by your name, you are mine." So we ask ourselves, well, where did the name Israel come from? Well, the name Israel did come from that event where Jacob wrestled with the angel, and it was pronounced that his name shall be called Israel, Prince with God, Prince with Ale. That's the idea behind Israel. Now, if the prophecy said, "I have called you by your name, you are mine," then you think that maybe, just maybe, people would have made something more of this. Because on May 14th, 1948, when David Ben-Gurion stood up and declared the statehood in the old Tel Aviv Museum, now Independence Hall, on Rothschild Boulevard, the climax was this sentence: "We hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as the State of Israel." This was the applause line, the culmination, the naming of the state. Now, that was not so certain until Ben-Gurion stated that. They had not all agreed on what the name would be. But his attachment that we are in the land of Israel, Eretz Israel, so the name of the state's going to be Israel. But a little investigation of this. Now, this is where, we got to be students, not only of the Bible, but we got students of history to see what the possibilities were that it may not have been Israel. Did you know that prior to the United Nations, or in the time of the United Nations working on where they would actually place Israel before the dividing of the land, there were 10 different sites around the world. And one of the sites was in Canada. And one of the sites was in the United States. The United States says, we'll put them in Alaska. And Canada said, we'll put them in the Mackenzie Delta, where there's 24 hours of sunlight for a couple days, and then 24 hours of dark for a few other days. That was the nation's attitude. Were they really serious? Well, let's just continue this, because I think it's quite important to think of what some of these nations, including Canada, actually did. But just a little more in Isaiah first. I'll just go through Isaiah chapter 43 in verses 3 and 4. So in 1400 BCE, there was a fulfillment of what it says here. For if you look at Isaiah 43, where it says, "I am Yahweh, your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I gave Egypt for your ransom, Ethiopia and Seba in your place." When did he give Egypt for Israel's ransom? Well, the Bible comes up with those words. Like, it's not as if we can just go to the Bible and see what it talks about Egypt. Notice what it says here. In Exodus chapter 10, verse 7, "Then Pharaoh's servant said to him, 'How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve Yahweh their God. Do you not yet know that Egypt is destroyed?'" And this was before the firstborn were killed. And God gave the people of Egypt up for the salvation of Israel. And that's the fulfillment, I think, of one aspect of that verse, in verse 3 there, of Isaiah 43. "Since you were precious in my sight, you have been honored, and I have loved you. Therefore, I will give them men for you and people for your life." And while we're seeing the same kind of thing happening today, where Israel's future from the nations of the world's point of view is very tenuous, and we'll talk about that in just a moment or two, how tenuous it is. But these things illustrate that unless God was there, the nation wouldn't be there at all. If we go on and we look at the refugees that no one wanted. Now that's a historical picture. And they're all Jews. And they're all on a boat. They're coming from Europe. They've survived the Holocaust. Or have they? Because in Isaiah 43, verses 5 and 6, God says, "Fear not, for I am with you. I will bring your descendants from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not keep them back. Bring my sons from far and my daughters from the ends of the earth." An obvious reference to the captivity and bringing them back from Gentile lands. But the Canadian Encyclopedia reveals this. On June 7th, 1939, 907 Jewish refugees aboard the MS St. Louis, that's that picture. The ship returned its passengers to safe harbor in 4 European countries. Sadly, 254 of its passengers later perished in the Holocaust. Now, that's not unusual. No one wanted the Jews. It wasn't a matter of people coming from all these other countries and having some place to go. They didn't have a place to go. And so the ships were turned back. Well, you think of 1939 and the Depression years, and people knowing that if you accept a ship of Jewish refugees, you might expect there's going to be a second ship and a third ship. There's going to be thousands of them. Where are we going to put them? We don't have jobs. Our people are longing themselves to have work and to have a good life. If they had ever known what would have happened to them, they may not have done it. And yes, our present Prime Minister has apologized publicly for what they did in that event of turning them back. Was Canada really serious about sending them to the Mackenzie River? Way up there in the far north of Canada? There's something that we need to know about this, which is certainly made known in Brother John Thomas's work in Alpha's Israel. I want to just read this to you. This is 1848. He says, "There is then a partial and primary restoration of Jews before the manifestation, which is to serve as its nucleus or basis of future operations in the restoration of the rest of the tribes after he has appeared in the kingdom. The pre-advential colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles, and the Jewish colonists will return in unbelief of their Messiah, of the Messiahship of Jesus, and of the truth as it is in him. They will emigrate thither as agriculturalists and traders in the hope of ultimately establishing their commonwealth, but more immediately of getting rich in silver and gold by commerce with India, and in cattle and goods by their industry at home under the efficient protection of the British power. And this, their expectation, will not be deceived, for before Gog invades their country, it is described by the prophet as a land of unwalled villages, whose inhabitants are at rest and dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, having neither bars nor gates, and possessed of silver and gold, cattle and goods, dwelling in the midst of the land." Well, that was 1848. John Thomas had no idea what would happen a century later. Like he couldn't write the event and say, this is how it's going to happen. He believed that this is what prophecy said would happen. There is a partial restoration, and these people come back in unbelief. And then there's a fuller restoration when people will come back and then be accepted by their God, and they will accept their God themselves. So we have got to discriminate between what we're seeing and what we have seen and what we will see ourselves in prophecy. You look at this. Many of us have thought, and I think I would be included in that. I think there would be certain talks I've given that would testify to the fact that we thought the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled because we saw Jerusalem freed from Gentile domination in 1967. They actually took the old city. Since then, I don't think we have been so sure, because although they have taken the old city, there's many Gentile possessions, including Russian possessions in the city of Jerusalem, that are still Russian possessions. It's not as if they have been totally liberated from Gentile rule. So we might, like many other prophecies, see it as a beginning. It was a wonderful experience to go through what happened in 1967. But I think in Isaiah 43, verse 10, we have a prophecy that allows us to attach a lot of data to it. And that is where he says in verse 10, Isaiah 43, "You are my witnesses, saith Yahweh, my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, nor shall there be after me." Now that would be the witness that we would say just prior to the kingdom, when the Jews have been accepted and they've come through all of the wars, etc., that God will bring them through. It's amazing to note that not only in the 67 war, but maybe primarily in the 73 war, and now in this war, in 2023, that Israel would not be nearly as well off if it wasn't that they had powerful nations ready to come to their assistance. If you can just think, if you've been keeping up in the news, if you can just think of where Israel would be now if there weren't an American aircraft carrier fleet or two in the Mediterranean warning other nations, stay away. Don't get involved. Can you imagine what it would be like if there were no other nations saying that? And not only did the Hamas people attack Israel, but so did the Hezbollah group. So did the group from down in the southern area. And all nations came on Israel, they would easily wipe it out. Just overwhelm its defenses by sheer numbers. The time hasn't come yet. And I think that's one of the things that we have to be very vigilant of as to where we are in prophecy. Now, I want to take you for a few minutes through something you may not have seen. This is something I just stumbled upon. I wasn't really looking for it, but many times when you are looking for something else, you stumble on some real value. So we've been seeing these pictures. If you've been watching the news, you will notice that this is up to date. Just a month ago, the people of Israel were out in the streets demonstrating against their own government. And all these Israeli flags, they wanted Israel to survive, but not the way the government was going. And we sort of wondered, well, how can Israel survive this way? That the whole government is at odds with one another. And then if you just read a little about what's going on here, I found that this was an interesting article. This came somewhat afterwards. You can see by the date there. This is April 23, 23. And it tried to explain what was going on, but I believe that there was something going on which we're going to look at long before this. So it describes the difference between a democracy and a theocracy. A theocracy would be God at the center. God is ruling. Just like before Israel chose to have a king, God says to Samuel, well, they've rejected me. I should be their king. That was what God had in mind, a theocracy. But a democracy is where all the people decide what they're going to do. It's not a matter of someone saying, well, what does God say? Now you see how this comes out. So we read, on Netanyahu's side is a religious and socially conservative coalition that includes the politically powerful ultra-Orthodox minority, the religious nationalist community, including West Bank settlers, and Jews of Middle Eastern descent who live in the outlying working class towns. Now, I would not have known that you put Netanyahu in that class. But his recent actions against what these demonstrations are doing would illustrate that is where, if it's just a political bent he has or a political pressure that he's made this stand, that's where he appears to be. Then again, those protesting against him are largely secular, middle-class professionals behind Israel's modern economy. They include high-tech workers, teachers, lawyers, current and former commanders in Israel's security service. And the article was entitled, "A Deeply Divided Israel Limps Toward Its 75th Birthday." Well, we know that that was exactly the way it turned out, that Israel was not ready for what happened. But this led me to this article. And this article was written in 2014. And it says, "The IDF, Israel Defense Forces, Army of the People, or Army of God." So I'll read this to you, and I'll try to read this fairly quickly because there's a number of passages to be dealt with here. So on July 9th, 2014, as Israel prepared for a ground incursion in Gaza, isn't that interesting? It's exactly what they're preparing for now. But this was 2014. And this Colonel Ofer Winter, commander of the Givati Brigade, sent a letter to his subordinate officers, which was criticized for its religious content. In the lines below, Professor Mordecai Kremenitzer discusses the appropriateness of the content of the letter. So this is really inside correspondence. Now, this is the position of the secular part of Israel. The IDF is the army of the state. Another, the army of the democracy, the army of the people. The statement in Colonel Winter's letter can be understood as transforming the IDF into the army of God, especially since the enemy is defined as the enemy of God. The Israel Defense Forces is the army of the state, not the army of God. It must be the army of the state and only the state. It must be subject to the government's authority and not to any other authority. And it must be accountable to the Knesset. There is no room for another entity between the army and the representative of Israel's citizens in the government, not even for the Almighty himself in all his glory. If he is there, then in effect, those who speak for him are also there. And as we have seen, their words are likely to be different than those of the IDF and authorized officials. Pretty clear, isn't it? There's not much left to imagine. That's the democracy side of Israel. That's the will of the people. That's the demonstrators that are out there by, the tens of thousands in the streets of Israel. We don't want God. We will look after our future, thank you. Now, to see it written like that, I thought was really amazing. But then he went on to explain what the other side was. The IDF is the army of God. I lift my eyes up to the heavens and call out together with you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Lord, the God of Israel, grant success to the path on which we are setting out to do battle on behalf of your nation Israel against an enemy that blasphemes your name. In the name of the IDF fighters, and specifically the fighters of the Givati Brigade and its commanders, may God act and fulfill through us the biblical verse, the Lord your God goes with you to do battle against your enemies to save you. And let us say amen. Now, those two attitudes are the polarization which divides Israel today. But we've got to be glad as Bible students that there is people that are saying this, because God's going to bring a third through the troubles that Israel's going through, even though 2/3 would be cut off and be destroyed. So this dichotomy we're seeing right now is really exciting because it illustrates how close we are to God intervening to save his people. So what's the conclusion behind the article? Well, the man says this: the IDF commanders and the government to whose authority the military is subject cannot allow themselves to ignore the change taking place in the army right in front of their eyes. Turning a blind eye and conducting business as usual are the opposite of what is required of leadership. It is not too much to expect that those who demonstrate military courage will also demonstrate the civil courage necessary to address this problem. Boy, that's a different spirit. And that's what they're encouraging that actually goes on and continues in Israel. Now, it's significant to notice that this is only be one of a number of passages, that this has just been Israel's history. Look at what Nehemiah has to say about it, Nehemiah 9. Therefore, you delivered them into the hand of their enemies who oppressed them. And in the time of their trouble, when they cried to you, you heard from heaven, and according to your abundant mercies, you gave them deliverers who saved them from the hand of their enemies. But after they had rest, they again did evil before you. Therefore, you left them in the hand of their enemies, so that they had dominion over them. Yet, when they returned and cried out to you, you heard from heaven, and many times you delivered them according to your mercies. That's the pattern in Israel. They could only stay with God. Like you look at all the judges of Israel, you can see it right in the words, the description of what happened in that judge's period of time. That they were glad to be rescued by God. But when things went good, do we need God? No, we don't need God. And there was just about enough time in almost every occasion for a new generation to grow up that didn't know Yahweh. And they went right back to where their parents had been at the time they were being suppressed by their enemies. So when we have a look at what's going on in the war in Gaza presently, if we looked at it through the eyes of Isaiah 43, even I am Yahweh. Besides me, there is no Savior. I have declared and saved, I have proclaimed. There was no foreign God among you, therefore you are my witnesses, saith Yahweh, that I am God. It's not that they're just witnesses. They witness to the fact that their God is God. And that's why I said a little time ago that these people are essentially being saved from a much worse situation because there's a fleet out in the Mediterranean with a number of aircraft loaded with weapons, quite prepared, told other nations, we are prepared to stand behind Israel. Don't get involved. But if that fleet wasn't there, and we know in Ezekiel 38, it won't be there. All they will say is, what is Gog doing? What is Russia doing? They won't be there to say, don't you dare come into Israel. That's the shift that's got to occur. And when it is, and does occur, they will recognize there is no Savior except their God. And when they admit that, and they return to God, therefore you are my witnesses, saith Yahweh, that I am God. They've got to do that to witness that their God is Yahweh. And I think I'd just like to finish today with this from Isaiah 40, verses 1 and 2. Comfort ye, yes, comfort my people, says your God. Speak comfort to Jerusalem and cry out to her that her warfare is ended. Her iniquity is pardoned. She has received from Yahweh's hand double for all her sins. That it's not going to go on and spiral on and on and on and on. It will happen that they will finally turn back to their God, and when they do, God will pardon them. And once again, he will be their God, and this time, continually, because they will recognize him as their God as he does, that they are his people. So we'll leave it there and just open up for a few minutes for comments or questions. But please, if you want to speak, use the microphone so that anybody that's watching online or listening can also be involved.
Can you comment on the dwelling safely and being at rest? One of your quotes had that up there, and I mean, we're all on the edge of the seats watching what's going on there right now, but that particular characteristic seems to be a long way off. There was this opportunity for peace with Saudi Arabia, and this seems to be a direct hit on progress for peace, and now it seems like a long ways off. I heard that they're moving from the Iron Dome to the Iron Beam a little faster, and they're relying on themselves. But there seems to be a lot of walls and a lot of self-reliance to maintain existence in the land. Any vision that you see for how this is going to unfold that way?
Well, I think that's been true for a number of generations, even that we have been in contact with, like our parents, their parents. Look at Robert Roberts, look at John Thomas. A lot of them thought that the things that they were seeing would come into fruition and Christ would return. And the things that we're seeing behind the scenes, we all, I think, try to interpret them as to like where this alliance with Saudi Arabia, if it's made, where it would go and how it might. But I tell you, Ted, I really have been moved by events like what happened in 1989. And that probably was a major shift for me in my understanding of the way God works. We had been talking up to about that time that the only way that Europe would be united would be by war. It would be by conquest. Either the Warsaw Pact countries would conquer the NATO countries, or NATO would wipe out Warsaw. We never saw the Berlin Wall coming down the way it did. We never saw the Soviet Union, there was no writers saying the Soviet Union will be dissolved. We were just told it in the news, and then we had to understand it and see where it went. A lot of people thought, well, if that is the case, the Soviet Union is disbanded, then Russia can't be the nation of Ezekiel 38. And we had to deal with that for a period of time. So we've got to just be patient, I think, in what we're seeing about what's going on in Israel and the agreements with other countries. It would be nice to think, because of what the Apostle Paul says, that when they say peace and safety, then comes sudden destruction. You know how the people in World War II took this up, and it was, I think, Chamberlain was the prime minister at the time. He went to Europe. He came back after meeting with European leaders, I think including the Nazi leaders, that there would be peace in his time, or peace in your time, as he was talking to people. And then with just a very short time, war broke out. He just didn't see this and wasn't using Bible prophecy. Well, what prophecy could he use on that one? So I just think we've got to be kind of on the edge of our chair always, because that makes us good Bible students, but always making the assumption that we don't see it all. And some of the most significant things just come by God's timing and his willingness to share these things with us.
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching, and remember to come back soon.